actually set through the planning scheme, and that's administered by the Department of Planning and Community Development. Now, I know the community's frustration in dealing with the EPA over the issue, but under the planning scheme, councils or the Minister for Planning are responsible for issuing those planning permits for wind energy facilities. Now, this project at Leonards Hill was approved by the Hepburn Shire under a planning permit. It requires a noise monitoring program, but the council has the direct planning powers to require and review the noise standards and the compliance standards there. So it is an issue around wind turbines that it is not directly the accountability of the Environment Protection Authority to oversee and hold to account wind farms in our state. They are set up under the planning scheme, and they are either the purview of the Department of Planning and Community Development if they're brought in there, or they are local councils who are responsible for them. Now, we know that they're quite complex systems, and we've offered to provide whatever assistance, both technical and otherwise, we can to the Shire in this case to assist them in overseeing this piece of work. Look, we're aware of a number of issues of dissatisfaction about how wind farms are placed, regulated, permitted and overseen. We're certainly aware of some of the issues coming out of Hepburn Shire. We are happy to talk with the community about options, how they might work through the planning scheme. We mightn't be in control of it, but we do understand how it works. And we're happy to work with residents from that area or others who are more broadly concerned. And I know in the next week or two we're meeting with groups who are involved more broadly in the wind farm issue to hear some of their issues. Many of you will be aware that HRL is an application by HRL under their brand Dual Gas to build a 600 megawatt coal-fired power station down the Latrobe Valley using a gasification process. And clearly there's a lot of concern that in the works approval process the EPA has approved a design which is half of what was sought down there. In other words, a 300 megawatt station as opposed to a 600 megawatt station. Those who are interested in the issue will be aware that our decision to approve a 300 megawatt station is the subject of appeals in VCAT. The proposed developer of the site is appealing against our decision because we've halved what they sought, and I think 5 or 6 activist groups are appealing our decision because we approved half of what they sought. So we're nice and neatly in the middle of a contest at VCAT over the HRL plant. The issue which was raised by a number of campaigning groups through the many thousands of submissions that we've received about HRL is, given the concerns about global warming and climate change, why would you allow any further brown coal production here? We took a view, and clearly it's a view that will be challenged in a fairly lengthy VCAT proceeding that commences, I think, next week or the week after. We took a view that in the lead up to this application had been made, our Parliament passed legislation called the Climate Change Act, which provided for an emissions efficiency level on coal-fired power stations. It said if there's a B coal-fired power stations, their emissions should be 0.8, an emission of 0.8 per tonne. It was clearly, and that was a bill which was passed and voted in support of by every member of the lower house of Parliament. It was clearly the intent of Parliament to provide for coal to be burnt to generate electricity at this time. And they've done so by setting an efficiency level. Our interpretation of the Act was to ensure that that target was met by this project. Now, we understand there are provisions within our Act which are open to interpretation about whether best practice in energy should be, how could it involve coal at all? Shouldn't it be solar or renewable? I understand that, and that'll no doubt be the subject of the VCAT hearing. And there'll be all sorts of submissions put in that regard. But our view was very clearly that, and we had this interpretation checked and rechecked by a number of legal experts, that the appropriate interpretation was to take into account the way Parliament interpreted the issue, and to seek to say, is it a best practice gasification process, which our experts found that it was, In that case, it could go forward. We only approved half the station because there were issues in relation to a second gas turbine which they want to put in, which we don't believe is best practice. I've had that debate and I'll continue to have that for some time to come. Issues around the addition of fluoride to water supplies. Again, obviously putting water into the water supply is not an EPA issue per se, it's a Department of Health issue. They regulate the addition of the... A lot of our work around fluoride, clearly we are cognisant of the effect that fluoride can have on the environment, and there are standards for those fluoride levels in water set nationally and internationally. We do monitor fluoride levels in Corio Bay because of the Point Henry smelter at Alcoa. Aluminium smelters are a major emitter of this issue. The results for the seawater in Corio Bay are typical of seawater in that area. Our priority with regard to fluoride has been to control emissions to the air, not into the freshwater stream as put there. And that's because we are aware through our work with Melbourne University of the impact that fluoride can have on animals, and there's been some publicity over the last 12 months around the terrible impacts on kangaroos. Fluoride falls in the grass, kangaroos eat the grass, and we've seen some horrible bone disfigurement result on there. In talking to our own scientists about this over the last few days, again, the organisation's ultimately driven where the evidence takes us, and there's not any evidence of fluoride impact on fish or any of that was. I note the concern there about what's happened with the British soil scientists, and I've asked our scientists to review that data and go and see whatever information there is there to work on.
What did you find that?
Satisfying, but I still need an answer because I'm the one that's losing sleep over the noise pollution in a country environment. It's not acceptable. But I did get the impression it was being rushed through a bit. I felt that I'd asked the question enough to put the CEO into a corner, so he's got to answer the question.
To look at those questions, at specific questions, and get that feedback, and hopefully that will lead to more and more questions being answered, and we get the feel of what's going on in the community.
It certainly raised some new issues for us, and look, it just gets you thinking about different parameters of issues. The thing I've enjoyed the most about it has been this monitoring of the votes on the questions. It's been like a league ladder of questions over about the last few weeks. And so almost on a daily basis, someone's saying, oh, this is number one, and something's come from behind, and number three, and what's moving up. And there were some questions from left field there, and it got everyone, okay, well, what's the right response to that? As I say, it had me in conversation with one of our lead scientists this afternoon about one of the questions that was asked, because I wasn't quite clear on our formal answer that we put together. So it was a good opportunity to me to learn some more about an issue which previously I had no knowledge of.